The Arizona sun had baked the town of Red Rock into a dusty oven by midday. The heat rising from the dirt streets and shimmering waves that distorted the buildings into wavering mirages. Caleb Morgan had been in town for less than an hour, his horse lathered and his own throat parched from a long ride across the desert. He had come to sell a small herd of cattle, a routine task that should have taken a day, maybe two. But as he stepped onto the wooden boardwalk outside the saloon, something made him stop, a feeling he had learned not to ignore after years on the frontier. Across the street, standing in the shadow of the trading post, a woman watched him with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the entire desert. She was Apache, her long black hair braided with simple leather cords, her face weathered but strikingly proud beneath the shade of a warm blanket draped over her shoulders. She wore the clothes of her people, but there was something in her posture that spoke of a life caught between two worlds. Caleb had seen her type before: translators, negotiators, women who moved between the white settlements and the Apache camps, trusted by neither and needed by both. He nodded once out of habit, a simple gesture of acknowledgement, but she did not nod back. Instead, she held his gaze with an intensity that made the heat of the day feel suddenly irrelevant. He pushed open the saloon doors and ordered a whiskey, the familiar ritual grounding him in the present. But even as the bartender poured, Caleb found his eyes drifting back to the window, searching for the woman. She was gone. He shook his head, dismissing the encounter as nothing more than the paranoia of a man who had spent too many nights alone on the trail. He drank his whiskey, ate a plate of beans, and arranged for his cattle to be sold at dawn. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, he had convinced himself that the woman was already forgotten. But he was wrong. He had rented a small room above the livery stable, a sparse space with a cot, a wash basin, and a window that faced the main street. As evening settled over Red Rock, he sat on the edge of the cot, cleaning his revolver by the pale light of a kerosene lamp. The town grew quiet around him, the usual sounds of drunken laughter and arguing gamblers fading into the stillness of the desert night. He was about to blow out the lamp when a soft sound came from below, not a footstep, but a deliberate tap against the wooden post of the stable entrance. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. Caleb moved to the window, his hand instinctively resting on the butt of his holstered revolver. Below, standing in the narrow alley beside the stable, was the Apache woman. She was alone, her face upturned toward his window, illuminated by the faint glow of a single lantern hanging from the stable eaves. She did not call out. She simply raised her hand and made a gesture, a slow, deliberate motion that he recognized from years of trading with the Apache. It meant silence. It meant follow. And then, in a voice just loud enough to reach him, she spoke 4 words that would change the course of his life. Come at midnight. She disappeared into the shadows before he could respond, leaving him standing at the window with a dozen questions burning in his mind. He knew the dangers of the frontier, the distrust between settlers and Apache, the blood that had been spilled on both sides, the men who would shoot first and ask questions never. A white man following an Apache woman into the night was a risk that bordered on madness. And yet, as he looked out at the darkness that had swallowed her, he felt something deeper than caution. He felt curiosity, and beneath that, a strange, unshakable sense that she had not chosen him by accident. He spent the next 3 hours in a state of restless indecision, pacing the small room, his mind racing through possibilities and dangers. He told himself to stay put, to wait for dawn, to sell his cattle and ride north as planned. But every time he reached for the lamp to extinguish it, her face came back to him, those dark, steady eyes, the quiet authority in her voice, the weight of something unspoken that hung between them. At 1:45, he strapped on his gun belt, pulled on his duster, and descended the creaking stairs into the silent street. The town was a ghost under the moonless sky, the buildings dark and shuttered, the only light coming from a few dim lanterns left burning outside the saloon and the marshal's office. Caleb moved along the boardwalks with the practiced silence of a man who had learned to walk softly in dangerous places. He reached the alley where he had last seen her and paused, listening. The night was so still he could hear his own heartbeat. Then, from the darkness ahead, a soft sound of footstep on dry earth, a deliberate signal. He followed it into the maze of shadows behind the trading post. She was waiting for him at the edge of town, where the last buildings gave way to the open desert. She stood beside a horse, its coat dark and still, its breath forming faint clouds in the cold night air. She did not speak when he approached, only inclined her head toward the trail that led east into the foothills. Caleb looked at her, then at the darkness beyond. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low. She met his eyes, and for a long moment, she simply looked at him as if measuring something invisible. Then she said, "To find the truth." They rode in silence for nearly an hour, following a trail that seemed to exist only in her memory, winding through arroyos and across dry creek beds that glowed pale silver in the starlight. Caleb kept his hand near his revolver, not out of distrust for her, but because the desert at night was a place where anything could be watching. She rode ahead, her figure a steady shadow against the darker shadows of the rocks, never looking back to see if he followed. She knew he would. And somehow, despite every instinct that told him to turn back, he knew it too. At last, she reined her horse in at the mouth of a narrow canyon, the walls rising on either side like the ribs of some ancient beast. She dismounted and gestured for him to do the same. "From here we walk," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb swung down from his saddle and tied his horse beside hers. As he followed her into the canyon, he noticed the silence deepening around them. No coyotes, no night birds, no rustle of wind through dry grass. It was the silence of a place that was waiting. And in that silence, he heard something else. Voices, low and urgent, echoing faintly from somewhere ahead. She led him through a narrow passage, where the canyon walls almost touched overhead, then stopped and pressed her back against the rock, pulling him into the shadows beside her. He opened his mouth to speak, but her hand closed around his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. She pointed ahead, and he looked. In a small moonlit clearing beyond the passage, 4 men sat around a dying fire. They were not Apache. They were white men, rough-looking, armed, their horses tethered nearby. And in the center of their circle, bound and gagged, sat an Apache elder with silver hair and a face carved by a lifetime of hardship. Caleb's blood ran cold as he recognized the situation unfolding before him. These were not soldiers or traders. They were bounty hunters, the worst kind of men who roamed the territory. Men who hunted Apache for the price on their heads, who cared nothing for justice or humanity. The elder was their prisoner, and from the way they spoke in low, harsh tones, they intended to deliver him to the authorities at dawn to claim blood money for a man who had likely done nothing but defend his people. Beside him, the woman's hand tightened on his arm, and he felt the tension in her body, the barely controlled fury of someone who had found what she was looking for. She leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. "That is my father," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion she had hidden all night. "They took him 3 days ago. They killed my mother when she tried to stop them." Caleb felt the weight of her words settle into his chest like a stone. He understood now why she had come to him, why she had risked everything to bring a stranger into this. She needed help. And in a town full of men who would see only an Apache prisoner and a bounty, she had seen something in him, a flicker of the old code, the belief that some things were worth more than gold. Caleb studied the camp, counting weapons, assessing the terrain, calculating the odds. 4 men, all armed, all awake. He was one man with a revolver and a rifle on his horse. The odds were impossible. But as he looked at the bound elder, at the woman beside him who had placed her trust in a stranger, he felt the weight of a decision that had no easy answer. He could walk away, He could return to town, sell his cattle, and pretend this night had never happened. No one would know. No one would blame him, but he would know. And that knowledge would be a weight he would carry for the rest of his life. He made his decision in the space of a single breath. "There's a ridge to the east," he whispered, pointing to a dark rise of rock that overlooked the camp. "If I can get up there with my rifle, I can cover you. You go in low, cut him loose. We move fast, we move together, and we don't stop until we're miles from here." She looked at him, and for the first time that night, something shifted in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but something close. Trust. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion, and in that nod, they became partners in something far greater than either of them had expected. Caleb moved first, circling wide through the darkness, his boots finding the silent places between stones. It took him 20 minutes to reach the ridge, every sound magnified in the stillness, every shadow a potential threat. When he finally lay flat against the cold rock, his rifle pressed to his shoulder, he could see the entire camp below. He picked out the 4 men in the firelight, their positions, their movements. And then he saw her, a shadow among shadows, slipping through the darkness toward the bound elder with a silence that seemed to belong to the desert itself. His finger rested on the trigger, waiting. The first bounty hunter heard something, a shift of sand, a breath out of place. He turned, his hand going to his pistol, and in that instant, Caleb fired. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the man's pistol flew from his hand as the bullet struck his wrist. The other 3 scrambled for their weapons, shouting, firing blindly into the darkness. But Caleb was already moving, firing again, pinning them down as the woman reached her father and slashed through his bonds with a blade she had hidden in her sleeve. The elder rose, weak but alive, and together they vanished into the shadows as Caleb laid down a final covering shot. They rode through the rest of the night without stopping, putting mile after mile between themselves and the canyon. The elder rode behind his daughter, his strength slowly returning as the adrenaline of escape warmed his blood. Caleb led them through the back trails he knew from years of trading, paths that no bounty hunter would find. When the first light of dawn finally broke across the desert, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, they found themselves in a hidden valley where a small Apache camp waited, a place of safety, of family, of home. The woman, her name was Ciala. He learned it dismounted and helped her father to the ground, where others rushed to greet him with cries of relief and joy. Caleb sat on his horse at the edge of the camp, watching the reunion, knowing that his part in this story was done. Ciala turned and walked back to him, her face no longer guarded, no longer haunted by the weight of a desperate mission. She looked up at him, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then she reached up and placed her hand on his, where it rested on the saddle horn. "You came," she said simply. Caleb nodded. "You asked." He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode out of the valley as the morning sun rose behind him, a man who had answered a midnight call and found something he had not known he was looking for. A reason to believe that trust, even between strangers, could still change the world.